So, how does a dream, the dream of a single, unified country, just fall apart? How does an idea that seemed so natural become completely impossible for millions of people? Today, we're going to get into the story of the Pakistan movement. And trust me, it's a complex journey of identity, power, and the eventual dramatic division of British India. It's really a story about how two paths that once ran side by side diverged so sharply they could never ever come back together. That powerful phrase, it comes from Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And those 6 words are so important because they basically mark the exact moment a negotiation failed and the dream of a united India, for many, died. What's so wild is that the man who said this, he was once nicknamed the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. So what on earth happened? Let's unpack the history that led to this absolute turning point. Okay, so to really get why a whole new country was even on the table, we have to look back at the empire that was lost. For centuries, the Mughal Empire was the big boss in India, with Muslims in charge. But when it started to crumble, it left this massive power vacuum. And for the Muslims of India, this wasn't just a political problem. It was the beginning of a huge identity crisis. And look, this wasn't some overnight collapse. The cracks had been showing for a long, long time. You can see the seeds of it way back in the 16th century, with internal fights over religion. Then, bam, 1707. The powerful Emperor Aurangzeb dies, and all hell breaks loose with these devastating wars over who gets the throne. And all this time, who's watching from the sidelines? The British East India Company, expertly playing everyone against each other, pushing the empire closer and closer to that final dramatic end. So what finally lit the fuse for this massive uprising? Well, it was a perfect storm, really. Politically, you had the British just swallowing up local kingdoms one by one. Economically, they were crushing local industries with these insane taxes. And they were even seen as messing with sacred religious customs. But the final spark, the thing that made it all explode, was military. These new rifle cartridges greased with cow and pig fat, I mean, that was an unimaginable insult to both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. It forced them to choose between their faith and their job. But for all its scale, the rebellion was, let's be honest, pretty much doomed from the start. There was no single leader, no big coherent plan. In fact, some really powerful groups like the Sikhs and Marathas actually sided with the British because of their own old rivalries with the Mughals. And just think about the tech gap. The rebels were disorganized, poorly armed. Meanwhile, the British had telegraph lines for instant communication and control of the sea for endless supplies. It was an impossible fight. And this is the crucial turning point. After the rebellion was crushed, the British pointed the finger squarely at the Muslim community, calling them the main instigators. The last Mughal emperor was shipped off into exile, ending centuries of Muslim rule. And then came the punishment. It was brutal. In the blink of an eye, Muslims went from being rulers to being a targeted, vulnerable minority under a very hostile British regime. So that was the problem. What was the solution? Right, so you're faced with this brand new reality. You've lost power, and you're being persecuted. What do you do? Well, a new idea started to form. It was an ideological solution to a very real political problem. And the idea was this. Maybe Muslims weren't just a community. Maybe they were an entirely separate nation.
This idea got a name, the two-nation theory. The core argument was simple, but at the time, totally radical. It said that Muslims and Hindus weren't just followers of different religions living in the same place. No, they were actually two fundamentally different nations with their own unique civilizations that were, in many ways, just completely incompatible.
And you can see just how deep these differences were believed to go. Proponents of this theory, they pointed to everything. I mean, look at theology, one God versus many gods. The concept of life itself, one life versus reincarnation. The very structure of society, an absence of a caste system versus a rigid caste system. Even everyday stuff was different. What you ate, the language you spoke, how you handled death. The argument was powerful. These weren't just minor differences you could paper over. They were fundamental. Okay, so you have this powerful idea, but an idea is just an idea, right? Turning it into a real political movement, that's a whole other ballgame. The next crucial step was all about taking this two-nation theory and turning it into action. And the first step, maybe surprisingly, was all about education. And this is where a really pivotal figure steps onto the stage, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. He looked around after 1857 and saw that Muslims had fallen way behind. partly because they'd resisted cooperating with the British. He argued that the path forward wasn't more conflict, it was empowerment. And for him, that meant one thing above all else: embracing modern, Western-style education so Muslims could compete in this new world. And he wasn't just a talker, he was a builder. He built the whole infrastructure for this vision, step by step. First, a society to translate all that Western knowledge. Then, a landmark college in Aligarh, designed to mix Western science with Islamic values. That led to a national conference to spread these ideas. And eventually, his little college grew into the Aligarh Muslim University, which basically became the intellectual engine of the Pakistan movement. It created a whole new generation of educated, politically savvy Muslim leaders. 35. That's it. Just 35. That was the number of educated, influential Muslim leaders who, in 1906, decided they were done waiting. It was time. Time to take their community's political demands straight to the top, to the highest level of British power in India, the Viceroy himself. So what did these 35 men ask for? Well, a fair slice of the pie when it came to government jobs, and a bit of extra representation in places where they were a minority. But their biggest demand, the one that would literally define Muslim politics for decades, was for something called separate electorates. Put simply, this meant creating special voting districts where only Muslims could vote for Muslim candidates. It was like a political firewall, designed to make sure their voice wasn't completely drowned out by the huge Hindu majority in every single election. That meeting in Shimla was a huge success, and it immediately led to the next logical step. Later that same year, the All India Muslim League was born. For the very first time, Muslims had their own dedicated political party, a vehicle to fight for these demands and protect their interests on the national stage. And this is where we get to the breaking point. We've seen the historical wound, the big idea that came from it, and the political machine that was built. Now we're going to see the breakdown, the final, failed attempts at compromise, and the moments when that parting of the ways became truly inevitable. You know, history is full of what-ifs, and this is one of the biggest. In 1927, Muslim leaders made a huge concession. They offered to give up their number one demand, those separate electorates, in exchange for a couple of things: a guarantee of 1/3 of the seats in the central government and the creation of some new Muslim-majority provinces. It was a massive olive branch. But the response from the Indian National Congress in what was called the Narrow Report was basically a flat no. No guaranteed 1/3 representation, the new provinces, maybe, but only if they could pay for themselves. And to top it off, they proposed making Hindi the official language. A huge compromise was met with a total shutdown. So Jinnah makes one last-ditch effort, a final attempt to find some kind of middle ground. He puts forward his non-negotiables. The 1/3 representation was a must. More power had to go to the provinces, and the new Sindh province needed to be created right away. The result? Every single amendment was voted down. For Jinnah, this was the final straw. It confirmed his worst fears, that the Congress Party would never, ever provide the basic protections the Muslim minority needed to feel safe in a united India. And that's when we come full circle, right back to where we started. It was right after this final rejection that Jinnah said those famous words. This was the parting of the ways. The moment the former ambassador of Hindi-Muslim unity became completely convinced that the only path forward was a separate one. The trust was gone, and the ideological divide was now a political chasm that nobody could cross. From that point on, you can just see things accelerating toward the inevitable. The experience of Congress Party rule in the provinces in 1937 just made Muslim fears of being sidelined even worse. By 1940, the Muslim League made it official, passing the Lahore Resolution and formally demanding a separate homeland. And then, just 7 years later, a Britain exhausted by war agreed. The partition of India was going to be a reality.
So in the end, the Pakistan movement achieved its goal. A new nation was born. But the way it happened, with borders drawn in a rush, with unimaginable violence,